Dynasty Warriors 9 Empires is Koei Tecmos' newest release of the lauded Musou series, dropping onto the Nintendo Switch. The game will also be available on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series consoles, and of course PC via Steam. In this review, I'll be focusing on the Nintendo Switch version of the experience and what are the good, bad, and ugly for this specific release. Now, right out of the gate, it needs to be said that Dynasty Warriors 9 Empires is trying to fix a lot of the wrongs from Dynasty Warriors 9, where pretty much the series decided to go a little bit open world, provided with a little bit of a different experience that didn't necessarily gel all that together. I'm not going to be focusing too much on what Dynasty Warriors 9 did wrong, but what I can tell you is that Empires is trying to fix a lot of those wrongs by removing the open world environment and focusing a little bit more on open areas, while still providing you with the option to be able to castle siege and castle defend. These are the two biggest changes to the game, and some of the additions are trying to focus more on you being able to either take down a castle by whatever means necessary, which could even implicate the use of siege weapons, and of course the other officers you have around you to support you to be able to make your way down to a final dramatic showdown within the castle walls. The other half of that is you defending a castle, so each one of the missions could provide you with any of these two very specific tasks, and defense is a little bit more kind of specific, where you're simply trying to support the officers who are defending a very specific area, and because your character does have the freedom to be able to freely move around and basically jet around throughout the entire map, you'll be able to have the option to ping pong back and forth from one area to another and defend wherever there's a hot spot of action going on. Now, some of the good things are that there's about 94 Musou characters available with over 700 different officers that were pretty much going to give you like a wide breadth of experiences. You're going to be able to just have different skills. Each warrior is going to feel a little bit different, although samey at the end of the day, because when I'm talking about combat in a second, you'll understand why. But they all have a little bit of a different flavoring to them, and if you don't necessarily like any of them for whatever reason, you do have the option of a rather extensive character creator, where you're going to be able to just pretty much pick and choose what type of options you want. The more actually you play, the more options you unlock, so you'll be able to tailor your character ultimately to the best of your desires. All of this is supported by the political alliances and the politics system, where you're going to be able to have your rulers, your generals, and officers are all going to be like having discussions with each other. They can become brothers in arms. They're going to be able to become enemies if you make the wrong decisions. And all of it exists pretty much to like give you a little bit of a wider experience and some sort of substance as to why it is that you're fighting and having these battles out in open fields. Ultimately, it tries to add it to a little bit more of the story, which, to be quite honest, as someone who hasn't necessarily played every game in the series, I was a little bit lost in a lot of the things that they were trying to say or what the goals they were trying to achieve. But ultimately, it didn't necessarily matter, because the politics system kind of breaks all that down into very specific what your character wants to do, what it is that you want to do with that character, and ultimately get to that specific goal. Now, combat is the meat and potatoes of all of these Musou games, as you versus 1,000 enemies, and of course some little officers here in the way, and then there's some specific goals that you need to be able to reach. Depending on the mission structure, is going to be changing a little bit here or there. But you're going to have the option not only have your basic attacks, your basic combos, that each one of the characters, like I mentioned before, there's 94 in total. You're going to be able to have different combo attacks, basic attacks with each one of them. You're also going to be able to have the option to use the R1 button to give you options like fling enemies up in the air and then combo them off like you traditionally would. You're going to be able to have the option to stun them and continue your chain from there. And also you have the option to be able to pretty much pounce them down into the ground, pretty much knock them over, and then continue your chain in that regard. So all of this is just to continue your combo attack and just continue that massacre you're trying to do, take out as many enemies as possible. And all of it culminates with a Musou special attack, which is like, kind of like the finisher, if you will. And all of this allows you the option to just simply rinse and repeat. You do a couple of special attacks, you chain them up with normal attacks, then you chain them up, either link them up in the air, punch them to the ground, stun them a little bit, and you just keep repeating that same loop. This is what usually Musou games are all about. My real issue here is that with the combat, it just kind of feels floaty whenever you're in the air. You're there for a very long time, so the characters don't necessarily feel all that great in that regard. And your character movement feels extremely erratic. He moves he or she will move extremely fast, and I'm not necessarily a big fan of that. And when it comes to real criticisms, of course, as you've been seeing in the gameplay, the game doesn't necessarily look all that great. On the Nintendo Switch, there are some real performance issues here, frame drops kind of all over the place. Resolution is really poor, even on the OLED, even docked. Handheld feels really chuggy, like just doesn't necessarily feel good or smooth, and docked isn't necessarily all that better, although it is playable in that regard. So there is a saving grace there. Ultimately, I think I would tell you to pick this game up perhaps on PC, perhaps on PlayStation or Xbox, especially if you have a PS5 or a Series X. I'm not necessarily a big fan of the Nintendo Switch experience for what this game is ultimately trying to do and achieve. The performance just simply isn't there right now. Perhaps I could patch it and get it to a good playable place, but for right now, as of the time of launch, that's just simply not the case. But those are pretty much my takes on Dynasty Warrior 9's Empires on the Nintendo Switch. If you are brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up, and as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.